Well, good morning. Thank you for coming. We will have copies of the presentation. It might be a little too loud. After the meeting, for those that about that. To tell you a little bit about the process that we went through for the budget that we're going to present to you, it'll be myself, Steve, and Ken, is we started back in January and February, and that's when we began to put together the capital budget and the operating budget. And the process for doing that, and a lot of you are probably familiar with the process during your careers, is that between myself, the directors of the various departments here, finance, with Steve and Monica and Adam, and with Ken, we kind of go back and forth on where we think we'll be with important factors such as census, expenses, and capital expenditures to arrive at the budget. We do look closely at expenses to make sure that we're being efficient with those expenditures. And after that, then we look at occupancy, our past occupancy, what we think we'll achieve, and then we arrive at our revenue projection. So I just kind of wanted to give you a little background on that. Hello?
I'm a new person.
Okay.
Would you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. Good point. I'm sorry. I'm Pete Bolt, the Executive Director. Okay. And this is Ken Connolly, Vice President of Operations, and Steve Powell, our Chief Financial Officer. Okay. Oh, and Adam Arcadia, the man behind the curtain. So, but thank you for reminding me of that. But that gives you, hopefully that gives you an idea of how the budget process works. So it's been a work in progress over the last couple months. We'll go ahead and go through the slides as our goal, and then at the end, take whatever questions you have, okay? Ken.
Every time I come up here, I have reflections about COVID, because I felt like every time I came up here, I was talking about COVID, but we're not talking about COVID. We're talking about our budget for this coming fiscal year, but I always like to start out with our mission statement. Lutheran Social Ministries of Maryland, guided by our faith-based values and through collaboration with affiliated ministries and ventures, forges relationships among the broader communities, leverages organizational capacity, and identifies and explores opportunity for further service. And then let's go to our vision. Reimagining aging through innovation and thoughtful stewardship. I think that's what we're going to talk about today. So I wanted to get those, our mission statement and our vision. And now I will turn it back over to Pete.
Getting my steps in. What I'm going to go over, the slides that you'll see above, are the budget objectives, some of the challenges at a high level in terms of putting it together, and then some of the key drivers. So for the objectives, was to share with the Carroll Lutheran residents our 25 operating budget and plans today. We want to highlight the core underlying assumptions, to review with you the overall financial performance results, and to examine and confirm the covenant results with you. The challenges of the budget, putting it together, just like any budget, is looking at the maintenance of the infrastructure throughout the campus. How do we keep that up? Keeping our wages competitive, and particularly with the skilled nursing staff. Managing the census at all levels, independent living, assisted living, the health center, and of course now the memory care. And then a large expenditure that we have with capital is the turning over of units when somebody new moves on to campus, and also renovating units that you're currently in based upon the need, okay? And then some of the budget drivers. Revenues were determined by the occupancy goals at each community, here and Miller's Grant, and that played into the recommended rate adjustments. The entry fees reflect a market-based approach to increase per residence, the type, depending on the type and size, was what the entry fee was based upon. The expenses have been built into consideration of the occupancy and with the services that we want to deliver. We focused on maintaining the margin by being as efficient as we can. Even today, this spring, probably over the last couple months, we found some additional efficiencies just looking at the budget, and so that was nice to see. And our capital budget focus is on the infrastructure improvements and obviously the optics, the marketability of the community. Okay? Steve?
Okay, I'm gonna move that right there. Is that still good? I didn't want to cover it. Okay. So Ken just spoke about the marketability, and in January, we contracted with a company, Lutheran company, to talk about what it is that we need to do at CLV to improve marketability. And a little bit later in the capital budget, I'll show you, we've added $1 million over the next 3 years, right, 2 years, to try and boost marketability. And you know, we're doing major renovation at Windsor Terrace is now complete. We're more than halfway through Avondale Place, and we're ahead of schedule, so that could be done by November sometime. So those are good things happening to try and improve the marketability. He also, oh, you just have me up there, that's no big. That revenues are determined by occupancy, and I think that's important because occupancy drives everything, right? And the last 2 years of this fiscal process, we have predicated the budgets on 86% occupancy. We went through the process to make sure that we were no longer dreaming when we put the budgets together and looking at 94% occupancy from an independent living perspective. We are managing at 86. And we're not quite there, but we're in the 85% range. So I think that's a big improvement. And a little bit later, I'm going to show you that we're coming out ahead even doing that. So the next slide is just inflation, year to year, big driver, all the time. And what you see in this slide is that there's been some improvements. You want to go back one? Thank you. You see trucking, 7.3% down year over year, which is great because everything that we get here at CLV is brought in by a truck. So that's good news. Now, you know, concrete, that's okay. Lumber down, all the work we're doing in Windsor Terrace and Avondale Place. Don't ever let me get away with that. That is the big mistake I make all the time. And I did that at a board meeting recently, and Jeff kindly suggested I reframe my remarks. Yeah, so beef is still up, chicken's still up, and that's what we eat, right? But you can't look at inflation just year over year. You need to look at a multi-year process, a multi-year schedule. And the next slide. And you'll see that while trucking is down 7.3%, it's still up nearly 40% over the last 3 years. And I look at a multi-year approach on inflation when we're going forward. I don't look just what occurred in the last half of the fiscal year or even year over year data. We try to look at multiple places. And my biggest disappointment on this chart is that bacon, pork bellies, is still up 18%. That just is disheartening to me. So I can't help it. I just love the fact that in the world, bacon is an indicator. I just don't, it just blows me away that that would be something that economists would review. But the way I eat it, I can see why that might be an indication. So the next slide just talks about inflation overall. And you'll see that we're much more in that 4% range overall. And that was a key for us as we were going forward. You know, the U.S. economy, forget about politics, the U.S. economy grew 3.3% during quarter 4 of 2023. That's a pretty significant growth pattern when you think generally what the U.S. tries to look to is 2.25%, 2.5% growth year over year. So we're still growing strong. That's a good thing. That growth is what's not letting the feds lower the interest rate because they're worried that it will be fueling inflation. So I just share that to let you know that we kind of go deep in on these things when we're trying to formulate the budget and look at where we might be. So let's talk about the next slide, which is our occupancy assumptions. And again, what Pete said at the very beginning, that it really is a team approach from the directors of the various departments all the way up and down. And it's also an iterative approach. So there's a lot of, I don't think we can do this, Pete. And we go back and we look again. He says, but I need to do this, Mr. Powell. And when he says Mr., I get concerned. We go back and forth. It's an iterative process to ensure that we're meeting the needs of the community in a fiscally responsible way. So we retained 86% as our occupancy. And we're hoping then to be able to beat that. Assisted living is at 94%. Right now, we're meeting that. Memory care is at 90. Do you need to?
I was just going to ask if I could interject when you're done with this slide, Mr. Powell.
It's all you, sir.
Wow. What I wanted to kind of reiterate, we were talking about 86%. Pete and I have had a lot of discussions about, the occupancy, but our biggest opportunity for growth and occupancy is sitting right over in Avondale. Windsor Terrace, if I'm Pete, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we only have about 10 units left. So Weller Homes, traditional homes, Weller Apartments, all way above, over 90%. It's Avondale that has the most opportunity for us. And with our renovation, definitely we're going to get there. Thank you, Mr. Powell.
Always, Mr. Connolly. Kind of.
I forget, which one's Avondale, which one's 201, and which one's 201?
Don't get me in trouble, Mr. Minnick. You'll see memory care on here. And most of us will think, gosh, haven't we always had memory care with Good Shepherd Way? But we moved memory care from a skilled nursing perspective, which really had some program behind it, but not the depth of program to help people as they were beginning into their memory care challenges. And we've moved it to an assisted living model with much more support for people as they begin that journey. More support for the individual and more support for the families. So basically, you can see skilled nursing, part of that big change from 64% to 87%, all of that big change from 64 to 87 is the change in what we're saying is our operating base in terms of number of beds. You know, we were the first skilled nursing center in Carroll County back in 1980. And we had 103 beds. There are a lot more skilled nursing centers today, and you don't get to come to skilled nursing centers from the hospital as often as one used to. You know, you go directly home with at-home care. The next slide, we can go, I want to talk a little bit about this. These are the payer mixes for skilled nursing. And the reason they're important is really the second one, and that's Medicaid. Our goal as an organization is to have about 30% Medicaid residents. We haven't hit that in a very long time because we have a commitment to everyone who moves in here to support them throughout their life as long as they didn't take their family on a round-the-world cruise. And a couple of other things, too. But that has caused a decline in revenue because we're even not at 48% where we're budgeting. Today, we're sitting at 54% Medicaid. And Medicaid covers just over about 55% of cost. Medicaid's a very poor payer. I testified in Washington this past year to give examples of our costs versus the Medicaid reimbursement schedule. We got a 3% rate increase in Medicaid, but when you're already at 55% of total cost, it really doesn't help to close that gap. Additionally, managed care is taking a much larger role in payer sources. And managed care, pardon me, falls somewhere between Medicaid and Medicare. So Medicare is a good payer. Medicare covers costs. Private pay covers costs. But the other two really don't. And so it's a balance as we go through. Let's talk about some key assumptions. For wages for all of the staff, 4%. So we have this thing called midpoint, and it really means you're paid at market rate. That's what we aim for, market rate, so that we don't lose all the training that we've given our team members, that they want to stay and work with us because we're paying them fairly. So, but if you're below that market rate, we have an opportunity for 4%. If you're above the market rate, you have an opportunity for 3%. Health insurance's costs increases, we budget at 5%. We renegotiated and came in at 4.8%. So I don't have any real flex in that number. Long-term, short-term disabilities at 5%, that came in at the 4.8%. Workers' comp, we budgeted flat, not so sure we're gonna stay there. We belong to a consortium for our workers' comp and liability insurances. And in the consortium, we've had some pretty significant workers' comp and liability experience this year. No one's sure exactly what it is. We have great training programs, great opportunities to help communities manage those costs, but this has been a rough year. If we can see improvement coming down the line, we'll be very appreciative of that. 403B is basically a retirement program for nonprofits, and we look at 4% of eligible wages. The next slide shows charitable intent. And that first number, or the bottom number, 3.11, is 3.11 million. That's two things. One, it's direct payments that we make in support of residents in assisted living and some in residential living. So it's RAF, if you're familiar with that. So that's $525,000. The rest of that we call a contractual loss. It's that Medicaid difference between what it costs to provide services and what we get in reimbursement. And the community absorbs that as we go forward. Contributions, 400,000, it will be either above or below that. I never hit that right because we never know what people are going to give for not in a campaign, this is just general giving. And then investment earnings. We have a portfolio and we're able to underwrite operating costs based on a 3-year rolling average of our portfolio so that we don't ever take too much and get hurt one year if the market goes up or down, and we don't take too little. So that's a way to manage how much we contribute. And I guess I want to stay here for just a second because this resident assistance program is probably not going to go down for a couple of years. 30%, and it's a good thing. I just want to give you perspective. 30% of residents living at Carroll Lutheran Village exceed their actuarial life. So this is a business, underwriting a business. So when you come in, I actually look at actuarial, I don't do it anymore, Adam does it. But we look at actuarial tables, all sorts of components as we look at residences. And 30% of us exceed our actuarial life. Now that's a good thing, and we kind of know that because all sorts of studies document that when you live in a community, you live longer. So we're prepared in some ways for this. Other ways, it just shows that we're going to continue with that program for a good while. Historical increases on the next slide. Did I skip a slide? I did. And that's because I'm a big guy. I hate wasting paper, but then I forget which way to flip the pages. So that's not good. So with all this understanding, what were we able to do? We were able to look at a 4% rate increase across the board. And that was a real commitment on the part of the teams. If we just ran the numbers easily, we probably would be higher than this. But Jeff Branch, CEO, really said, you guys, I'm looking at 4, so help me get there. And that's what we were able to do. So it's 4% for independent living. It was 8% last year. I'm sure you remember that. Just checking. And then assisted living was 4.5 last year. It's 4% this year. And the healthcare center was 4.5 last year, and it's 4% this year. On the healthcare center, it only applies to the private pay rate because Medicare and Medicaid really don't care what I think in terms of what their rate increases will be. I did provide a little bit of flex for us this year in that I did not count the 3% rate increase for Medicaid because it came late in the legislative session, and that will help underwrite any fluctuations in occupancy. The next slide shows the average historical rate increases, and this is where I was joking about the 8% that everybody remembers, and then the 5.5 before. Coming out of COVID was tough, not just for us. Throughout the state, we were very much in keeping and a little below the averages for the state in terms of increases. And we're back at 4s, and we look forward to being able to achieve that regularly in the future. The next slide, this is my bread and butter. This tells us whether we're going to stay operational from a debt perspective, from the people that hold our mortgage. And so our debt service coverage ratio, which is 4.94 against a required ratio of 1.2. Now, part of that reduction, and we're going to change the way we calculate to show you. So there's something when you do commercial debt that is maximum annual debt service. So it's not your average debt service, which is much lower. It's in your last year of debt, you have a big payment to make. And so when we had bonds that we sold on the bond market, they typically require a debt service coverage ratio called maximum annual debt service. When we renegotiated with the bank, we were able to negotiate average debt service. And so we got to be able to achieve that gap there. The other good thing is that we redeemed those bonds 2 years early in what they call a Cinderella financing. Well, we're just about ready for the pumpkin to turn into a carriage, because in June, we will convert the taxable debt that we issued for a 2-year period of 4.25%, still not too bad, to 3.36 non-tax debt beginning July 1 for the rest of the term. So we were very good. That sounded terrible. That's not what I intended to say. We did very well in this financing. And then the next one is liquidity ratio. And we have 257 days, and we're required to have 150. That just says if things don't go well, how long can you maintain operations to get yourself back on track? And we can have 257 days to be able to do that. I'm going to turn it back over to Pete to actually go through the budgets with you, and then I think I'll be back up later. Pete?
Thank you, Steve. We can go to the next slide, Amanda. This is a high-level review of the budget, looking at the revenue and expenses. If you could go to the revenue. As you can see on there, the difference in the revenue budget from 24 to 25 is just over about $4 million more in revenue. The majority of that is coming from the health center, which has had a strong census, and so we continue to budget a strong census, which adds to that revenue. As Steve mentioned, obviously the percentage of Medicaid with the lower reimbursement, you don't like to see that, but with more volume you can make up for some of that. Residential living is another piece of the additional revenue, and we have with us budgeting an occupancy of 86%. And then the addition of memory care is adding additional revenue compared to what we budgeted. Right now, we're out of our 20 units that we have there, 15 of them are full. At the beginning of January, we were probably 5, 6, 8, but under 10. So we're averaging about 1 to 2 a month building that up. So there you'll see the overall operating revenue budget for the fiscal year 25. Amanda, if you can go to expenses. In terms of expenses, the increase in expenses for the 2025 budget is just a little bit over $1.2 million. You'll see up there with nursing and residential care. That's a fair percentage of the increase, obviously staying competitive wage-wise. Wages make up 2/3 of our expenses, so you see the increase in there trying to be competitive. The other increase that came about that's probably making that up is marketing and philanthropy. We are going to spend a little bit more money in the marketing and sales department. As Ken mentioned, the majority of our units that are open are in Avondale. And if we're able to get Avondale up to the 90% mark like the other, like Weller, the upper campus homes, the cottages, That'll be very good for us financially, though. So there's a marketing and sales component to that. And so you'll see at the bottom, as I said, the overall expense budget increased a little bit over 1.2 million. And I believe the next slide, capital, is that you, Ken, or Steve? Would you want me to go over it? Go ahead. Okay. All right. In terms of the capital budget, the current budget was around 3.4, I think, this current fiscal year that we're in, and we have probably spent, we're approaching about 3 million. So we've spent the majority of it. We're going to go into the 2025 budget with a capital budget of 3.5 million. 85% of that's going to go into facilities, building improvement, turnovers when residents move in, current residents when they're getting possibly new flooring, painting, cabinets, and so forth. We look at how long someone's been on campus and the wear and tear of the unit. And so that's going on. And I think you saw some others throughout the year. We resurfaced the pool, tennis courts, pickleball courts, so forth as an example. 5% will go towards wellness and residential life. Another 4% in information technology upgrades. I think some of that includes some Wi-Fi upgrades on campus. A percentage of it's going to be going into the healthcare and assisted living. As you know, we have a project coming up where we're wanting to renovate the health center in the next couple years, kind of tied to giving and so forth. And then we rank each project in order. Okay. Here's through the plan for the capital program. You can see how it increases from 25, fiscal year 25, all the way up to fiscal year 2030, from the 3.5 million to the 4.2 million. So we do look at each year what we want to accomplish. So there is details to those numbers, so we kind of stay on track with the upgrades on campus. And then the community refresh. I don't know if you wanted to maybe say a little bit about that, Ken?
So as Steve had mentioned earlier, we had an outside company that specializes in marketing and branding and within the senior living. They did a full walkthrough of the community, and they presented to us areas of opportunity. Well, that's probably a little too kind. How about areas that need to be fixed quick? And so that's what those monies are designated for. And over, the next upcoming months, you'll start to see a lot more different things happening around campus, painting and just updating. You look at our front lobby; it's beautiful, it's clean, but it needs to be updated. So residents spend a lot of time in the front lobby. You greet family members there. We want to look nice and refreshed. So that's what the community refresh project is.
Not quite sure, Amanda, what the next slide is. Okay, legislative summary. We'll turn it back to Steve.
So I serve on the as chairman of Leading Age Maryland, which is industrial organization, right? And we also participate in lobbying efforts with the General Assembly. So I just want to go over a few because they're going to have impacts. There's a Senate bill that changes the requirements for assisted living managers to be more in line with SNF, skilled nursing managers. So there's a whole licensure process that will take place and a testing process to have all assisted living managers in Maryland achieve these national accreditation levels. Then there's another bill that, you know, if you go up into skilled nursing, we have graduate nursing, geriatric GNAs and CNAs, right? No more GNAs. Now, there's a time frame for them to get their accreditation, to move to be a certified nursing assistant, but there are no longer going to be GNAs in Maryland. And actually, that's almost going to be a national effort when you look at what's being done through the National Department of Health. So we have those two bills, and we're unsure exactly of the fiscal impact, but we know there will be some. Then we have a bill that's good. Maryland Department of Health is now requiring dental work to be included in all Medicaid services. And that's a good thing. Previously, it actually had to be impacting your physical health. And only then could dental work be included. Now it's just going to be included. The challenge on the provider side is that we know the rate already doesn't cover costs. And there is a provision in there that we're supposed to negotiate an appropriate reimbursement level. It's hard to negotiate with the gorilla in the room. They don't really negotiate well. And so what we'll wind up doing is saying thank you and walking away and figuring it out on our own. We are going to be identifying costs and putting them into a document to make a presentation to the state, but really whatever they do, we won't have a whole lot of say in it. And then there's pathways to nursing. Finally, the state in a formal way has acknowledged nursing shortages, not just in Maryland, but throughout the nation. And so if I were a nurse, a registered nurse in PA, I can't automatically come to Maryland to work. And the goal is to make that movement across state lines easier so that we can poach nurses from jurisdictions that pay less. That's the honest, the bottom line of what this is going to allow us to do. I know that that's a nasty word in HR, that you're not supposed to poach. You offer competitive environments and all this stuff, but that's what we're after. We're after trying to go elsewhere to fortify our positions. I think lastly, the big bill, and Dave is here, that we worked with MACRA to negotiate some settlement on, or mutual positions that we could put forward, was a continuing care retirement community bill. Right now, Maryland law requires us to have this kind of a meeting once a year. CLV, LVMG has always done it twice a year. Now we'll be doing it 4 times a year. And so we'll work with the RAC to identify what do you want to hear from us on those other 2 meetings. And we'll work with them to try and identify that. The disclosure document that you get when you join will now be posted annually on our website. No problems there. We also need annually to share whatever grievances we've had to process forward, formal grievances. And the challenge will be, in some communities, we can probably de-identify most of the grievances we receive. But poor Farhikidi in Cumberland area has 22 independent living residences. I doubt when they try to redact them, that it's going to truly de-identify what was taking place. But, we don't have any. We have grievances that come up through to Pete, and sometimes, but rarely are they formally filed. Most things are handled informally. And dinner being cold, or I don't like broccoli, those aren't really grievances. It really more has to do with care and support. The other big thing that came out of that, I think, is really for your heirs and successors. Right now, we try to market your unit as best we can. And during COVID, there were periods of time when that was long, 2 years, to market a unit. In part because the state wouldn't let anyone move in to continuing care retirement communities. And then there was just a fear of communal living. I don't want COVID. I'm better off in my home with my tight little bubble than I am in a communal living environment. At CLV, the average length of time is 10.3 months. At LVMG, it's remarkable. It's 92 days, and there's a turnaround. So I don't think we may have been part of it, and we were part of it. When you look at 2 years, we had some units that were 2 years in the marketing during COVID. My only concern with the bill, and I'll get to what it's going to say, my only concern is the bill is, people make decisions for all kinds of reasons. But if I buy a unit overlooking the HVAC system, because I can get in that with the money I have and then still have access to everything in the community, that's going to take longer to find someone who wants to live over the HVAC unit. In any regard, we do well. 10.3 here at CLV. From here forward, after 9 months of marketing, we will present a written report to the successor heirs, because it's rarely the resident. I mean, we have very few residents who just pick up and leave. It's typically the heirs. We'll provide a report in 9 months, and then every 6 months thereafter, we'll tell them what we're doing, how many people have looked at the unit, what's going on. We would have had some challenges, and we have had some challenges in the renovations of Avondale Place because the unit is off market. But we've worked really hard at paying those entrance fees back prior to being resold. So we were looking at, started at a year or 9 months, Adam? A year. So we were looking at a year, and then every 3 months, how we could pay resident families back the entrance fee, even though the unit hadn't been resold. And we were doing that even during COVID. The goal was really, people want to settle up. You want to kind of move on and put things in perspective when something like that happens. We weren't always able to do that. I know we had one that was 21 months. That's a long time to wait. And what we'll be doing now is, and we were talking with them regularly. No one sits and waits 21 months without calling us. So we were communicating regularly, but now there's a formal process that we'll undertake after 9 months and then every 6 months thereafter. I just wanted to share a little bit about what we've been working on. We hope to work with MACRA regularly. I know we have a meeting scheduled between Leading Age and MACRA later on in May. MACRA, there are about 21,000 folks who live in CCRCs throughout the state of Maryland. MACRA has about 2,100, 2,000 members, about 10% of the resident base. So we want to continue to work with them in trying not to have legislation solve our problems. We want to meet and talk about them. And I'm sure that there are, no one comes to the table or goes to legislation if you have the same perspective. There's no reason to have done that. Our goal is to work more closely and try to arrive at that shared perspective without legislation as we continue to work on some of the issues. And if some of that comes back up, I'll be back up here to explain to you why I think some of the ideas are either good or bad. And I'm not really shy about sharing those thoughts. So with that, I think we're your questions. And we'll let Pete be the master of ceremonies here.
Any questions? Ann? Oh.
Thank you. Couple of them. The Wi-Fi upgrade, is that part of the Ting thing? Is Ting finally going to move into the apartments?
We are wiring Ting. I shouldn't say that. We are wiring to allow for other providers when we renovate Windsor Terrace and Avondale Place. And we're next going to look at creating a channel to provide for other providers in Weller Place, which isn't wired in that same way now. I don't know about Ting, but what this project is, so throughout campus, there are these things called access points. You may not even notice them. Little boxes, some of them are attached to light poles. There's a whole section of them on the Zile Trail. If you walk through, there are little white boxes with a little tiny 3 or 4 inch antenna throughout the campus. Some of those are almost 20 years old. Now, the average life of it's called an access point, an AP, is probably 8 to 10 years old. Now, we've been replacing them when they go bad, but we're getting to a point where the old technology doesn't relate to the new technology. So we've got a 3-year program, about $100,000 a year, to go through and replace the old APs. That's what that project is quite specifically.
I've just got to ask, why did Miller's grant give us $10 million? I'm not unhappy. It's just something I can't.
Well, they are. I'm going down there this afternoon to have that discussion.
Can we come?
I put on chainmail underwear this morning. I'm good. Because you needed it. Because in 2004 and 5 and 6, all the way through 18 to when you got paid back, Carroll Lutheran Village underwrote $6.8 million to develop LVMG. Now, you were getting interest along the way, but you still had those monies that were not spent to make improvements on this campus, which is part how we got that, and the prior administration thought that you should only invest up to 40% of depreciation. Well, your budget, I don't know if you saw, your budget's $3.5 million, and your depreciation is just over 4. We are much closer to the 75% mark, but we've only been there in the last 5 years when there was a change of administrations. All of that led to Avondale Place and Windsor Terrace, which comprises about 50% of total units at CLV, to be in not as marketable of shape. You know, the hallways were darker. You couldn't individually control your heat. It was kind of what the majority needed is how now you had a little bit of range on your thermometers to bump it up a few degrees or down a few degrees, but not really to control your environment. And Carroll Lutheran Village funded the full $9 million improvement to Windsor Terrace of your own assets. When we looked at Avondale Place, to drop down another $10 million and then $10 million of debt, we weren't sure that was the smartest move. And the Lutheran Social Ministries of Maryland wants to grow. That's the purpose of that assessment, how we got that $10 million. But in order to grow, you need a really solid foundation. And CLV, listen, last year you lost over $1 million in operating. You're down to $33,000 for 25. And if I really wanted to, $33,000 in a $40 million budget, I could have played with it. But I really just wanted the numbers to reflect where they were falling out. But what that does is let us put CLV back on really solid footing. I think financially you're strong now. We've lowered the occupancy levels for the last 2 years to be more realistic. That really put us in a different financial position. It put us in a financial position where in 25 we're projecting basically to be square. And I wonder if we had taken that 10 million, whether I'd be in that same position. And I don't think we'll get any more. That's not the plan. The plan is, we will start, when CLV starts to boost that 86%, LSMMD will also make assessments of CLV so that we can add another community or another service that fits within the mission. Because right now, there are Augsburg recently sold, right? They tried to affiliate with another nonprofit. They were so far down that they're now selling to a for-profit. And we don't ever want CLV and the Lutheran Village at Miller's Grant to be in that position. So we just really needed to fortify CLV so we can grow strong, and then LSMD will assess that fee, and we'll use that to grow. So I don't think that's going to go over well in a couple of hours, but it's the truth.
Pretty sure it won't.
But it's the truth. You supported that community. Now, you did get paid back. They will not. But we'll begin probably assessing CLV before we begin to assess LVMG again. All right?
Yeah, that's just, because that gives us 21 million net assets, and we've never had 21 million net assets.
We're good. We're good. There's a question down on the other side.
Say a word about healthcare and the healthcare center. We are well aware that we have an older building. I am impressed as chair of the healthcare committee, the work that has been done already on hallways and doors and things like that. A lot has been done. It looks a lot better. The entrance to memory care is wonderful. But still, we're talking about upgrading healthcare. And when we've had comments, they are that we're going to do it in stages. Do we know what stages they are, or do we have a final shot as exactly what the building might look like? We were told several times that maybe we're not going to increase the building size at all. What we're going to do is increase how we handle the interior for the various agencies. So I guess the concern is the long term. We are well aware from having people visit our committee on who's going to pay for this. And we've been told that the first stage, approximately 70%, hopefully will come from residents right here and now. But we're also concerned about, I guess, what is the future and how long will it take? And do we have a final plan, or is it really a plan that's moving along as we go?
You want to do that?
So, and Lou, when you were mentioning the plan, I guess, for the future, there is right now, no solid, we don't have dates put down yet. They're more on the broader spectrum. As Pete mentioned, we need to get Avondale done, completed, and then we will start our more of a formal process with the healthcare center. So we don't have dates. I would say it's safe within the next couple years.
Yeah,
But we've really, from a campus standpoint, you know, Avondale and Windsor Terrace have been big projects, and a lot of, I don't want to say disruption, but yeah, I mean, a lot of our residents have had to move into temporary apartments and units, and there was just a lot going on, which means a lot of focus needed to be on those residents that were temporarily moved out and then moved back in, and making sure they get what they need while they were out, and then when they come back in. So I guess my point is that let's get Avondale, and then I will tell you the formal planning will start, and we will share that once we get that. But we don't have a formal plan yet.
Minor upgrades, painting and rooms that have been reassigned and everything. It looks a lot better today, I will give you credit, than it did, say, this time last year or 2 years ago. So at least something is being done to make it look better when people come. Do I want to invest? Do I want to move in here? Or do I want my parents to live here?
Right.
And that I appreciate that.
Thanks, Lou. And we are. Pete and I are looking. We're very, very closely at what we can do until we have those renovations for the healthcare center. Pete and I have started, and along with Heather Howlett, who is the director of the healthcare center, we are walking it every 2 weeks now, and we are finding areas of opportunity to improve. A lot of it's just painting, some of it's carpeting, some of it's, changing out some of the vents and some of the fixtures. So we're going to continue to do that and make it look even more quality for our residents that are here now and our future residents.
in the back.
Ian, to your left.
Has there been any impact on the utility costs of the solar panels? And did they cost us something, or are we just renting the space?
No, the solar panel project was a purchase project. The savings, we did not pay for those. The savings is taken, the payment for them is taken out of savings over a 7-year time frame, after which we will own them with a 25-year useful life. So while we haven't seen the lowering of our electric bills except by a couple $100 a month, they do give us a little credit every month just to kind of say thank you for participating in the program. But the real boon to the community will be in this 8th year after the repayment of the infrastructure.
Thank you.
On the same subject, what about the residents in homes for solar panels? Has anything been thought about that?
Yes, we actually looked at that when we did the larger program. And at that time, the company with whom we worked, Mission Energy, did not believe that the payback would be the same. Now, in part because we were not eligible for some state and federal programs as a private not-for-profit. They were intended for homeowners only. Just last year, the feds changed the rule, which may now, I say may because no one's really square into what the rule change really is, but they seem to have opened the door, I'm going to say unlatched the door, for us to potentially use some of those credits. If that's the case, then we would look at further expansion of the solar program.
Behind you, or
We were told that the solar work was going, or the panels, the project was going to be done with a grant. What happened to that?
Well, I don't recall the exact numbers. There was a grant. It was not fully covering costs. As a matter of fact, I think it was about 30% of costs. And the rest is a loan, which is repaid with savings. But with a 25-year useful life and a 7-year repayment schedule, there will still be benefit to CLV over time. And what's really nice is that our electricity costs aren't going up. You know, they'll be moderated based on increased occupancy, but they won't be growing with as much as they would have been. So.
and behind you, I think Gene had a question. To your left.
Hi, I have two questions. Number one is, I see we are looking up the whole time at some sort of document, and I have heard that we will get a document when we leave today, but why can't we have a copy of it before you begin, so those people who may not see as well as others can have it in their laps and also make notes on it for future reference? That's question one.
We can do that.
The next time?
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the number two had to do with salaries. In the beginning, you had said about the salaries, especially for the nursing staff, is on a normal basis. I'm just curious about the salaries for the little people, like the staff for the kitchen and the dining room, etc.
Yeah, the first question was is can we pass out the presentation before the presentation hard copies, which we can going forward. The second question, and Gene, hopefully I get this right, is what we're doing with salaries and wages for those that are in dining or other hourly type positions. Yeah, I can speak from nursing. We just recently, the GNAs and CNAs, I think it was about two months ago, we brought the starting wage up from $17.50 to $18.50, that being the bottom or the starting wage. Obviously, if you come in, depending on years of experience, that gets added. I know that we do a market study of wages almost yearly, and that goes into the budget that we presented. So that would be part of what we're doing with, say, dining in your question, Gene.
Just to elaborate a little bit more, yes, we Pete answered it very nicely, but we're always looking to at wages on those line level team members, and comparing to we get information and we adjust as needed. So it's an ongoing process. But the most important thing is that over the past 4 years that has been changed is that we organizationally make sure that every single team member gets an evaluation annually. And we're right now in the throes of it. So Pete and his team, they're going through every single team member and going through and making sure they get an evaluation. And then based off of that evaluation, they get an increase. So it's consistent. So we're not missing any team members. And most importantly, we're talking to them about their development. We find out a lot during those conversations with our team members, doing their evaluation, that, they like being a server, but they want to be a cook. Heck, we need a lot of cooks. Can't have too many cooks in the kitchen. So we're always looking at our team members and how we can not only with their wages, but in terms of career development. It's a big focus for us because people can get up, walk out the door without any notice, and we never see them again. And if that happens, shame on us. We're not doing our job.
So a big draw is Medicaid. That's a big draw that we have to cover in some way. That generally gets down to how long people live and how much funds they have. Has that been tightened up? I know I was at a presentation here previously, and I couldn't even go on vacation because I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding about that. But this goes back historically about how you evaluate new residents. So when I'm a new resident.
So what has it been? About 2019, we started a triennial review process. So every 3 years, we ask you for your underlying financial documents and make sure that it's in alignment with what we had when you entered the community. And if it's not, we have a conversation. And for the most part, even if it's not, folks are still fine as long as they're in independent living. And we have had residents that had to sign away any right to move into higher levels of living in the community because they bought their granddaughter a house. They gave the farm that was an asset for them to get in here to their son. Or the vacation home up at Deep Creek Lake. Now, it was gorgeous right on the lake. I get it. I get it as a family member. You don't want to lose those things that have family importance. But then mom or dad should not have listed them as available in coming into the community. So, but prior to my getting here, our model to review residents was that and I'm not being unkind because I love my predecessor. He and I still talk regularly. We have coffee once a month over the Facebook or FaceTime. We FaceTime each other once a month and have a cup of coffee. He's a great, great guy. But his thought process was it sort of all works out in the end. And, Dean can tell you, I'm not that guy. I really believe in our actuarial models, and I believe that we need to make sure that, for the most part, we believe that bearing any uncertain things happening, untoward things happening, that people can take care of themselves while they're here. So I would say that our entrance criteria has gotten tougher. I think if you ask marketing, they will say that. You know, they come back at me right and left, you know, in order to get people in. But our marketing, our evaluation criteria is tougher. We have triennial reviews, and we hold people accountable to those. So I think we've changed that a lot. Now, I told you that 30% of the folks here are outliving their actuarial age. I mentioned that earlier. Of that, 40% will probably need some level of resident assistance during their stay. And we're working with our actuary to actually think about the model in terms of actuarial age. And they do it on 600,000 lives within senior living communities. But we really want to talk to them about, you know, how often has that been updated? Are we taking into account current medical capabilities? Because we're seeing, 30% of our residents outliving their actuarial age. That's a challenge for us. So generally, I think we've tightened up our entrance criteria, and we really try to hold people accountable to what they told us.
We don't, as residents, have access to or generally interest in the staffing levels of the community. You folks take care of that, and however many people are available to maintain, fix things, clean things, we don't know. All we know is what we see. And it seems like in recent times, we're seeing faces turn over more than several years back. And it seems like if somebody leaves or two people leave, only one is added and everybody else has to work more. This may be not a realistic picture that we're getting, but it's just an observation from what we can see down at our level.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. Is the question was turnover, and do we fill the positions? We were just meeting a few weeks ago. Our turnover rate campus-wide is at 29%. The average, when I looked at the charts in terms of the state and nationally, was closer to, I want to say it was in the high 40s, 40%. So that's kind of a benchmark. When I look at FTEs that are open, probably over the last year or so, housekeeping and laundry typically averaged 3 or 4 openings. They are now, probably over the last 8 months, have been fully staffed. Dining, just up until recently, they've been actually fully staffed. They've kind of had a rough couple months. The nursing center is about average for a nursing center. So we haven't reduced positions from a budget standpoint year over year. Actually, facilities is probably fully staffed, maybe for the first time in a couple years with our techs. Now I say all this, but you're perceiving the other, which perceptions, that's what you're seeing. So that's really what, from an operations standpoint, I would probably want to talk to you more. Okay, where are you seeing this? And then I would be looking at, okay, are we fully staffed? If we are, then why is there the perception that something isn't getting done? That would be my approach. From a healthcare center standpoint, we probably average about 3.7 nursing hours. The minimum is 3 point, and we're probably at 3.7 is probably higher than most competitors. But if you're perceiving, or not even perceiving, or you're experiencing that staffing's impacting a service for you, housekeeping, laundry, facilities, health center, let me know and we'll sit down and talk about it. And we'll we can get with the director and see what's happening. I think everyone knows you could have 10 employees or you could have 3 employees, but how productive are they? Okay. Good, great question, comment. Ann?
On this issue of getting the employees, with us being where we're located, we don't have transportation. Have you been looking into something somehow for trying to help people that do not have transportation to get here?
In terms of, you're talking about employees' transportation.
Employees that, they would like to work here, and they may have applied, someone brought them because the job was open, but for themselves to get here if they don't drive or have someone bring them, is there some type
we've talked at times where I think the train, public transportation stops, probably about Owing Mills, maybe a little bit beyond that. Or is there a pickup point, on the north side of Greater Baltimore where we always had a transport van there at a certain time for a certain department? But we just haven't, we've talked about that, but how do you actually make that work? And is it, worthwhile? So it's a challenge. Behind Yan.
I have 2 comments or questions. One, the public Wi-Fi for Carroll Lutheran Village is not secure. Is there any way that can be secure? And secondly, I'm sure that the outsourcing different jobs is financially beneficial, but it doesn't seem to be going as smoothly as it could. How is that working?
So I'm going to let Pete talk about outsourcing, but anything can be done with money. So yes, I can make the public Wi-Fi secure with a significant investment, but it was never created to be secure. So we haven't given that a lot of thought, other than when we do have residents who rely on it. I understand that. But it's not secure. And there are opportunities within your departments to get secure. And the Wi-Fi at the library through those systems is secure. But no, the public Wi-Fi is not, and I've got no plans in my capital program to make it that way.
The question on outsourcing, we'd have to sit down and kind of talk about, obviously we outsource in culinary and we outsource in therapy. Outside of those are our 2 major outsourcing services, other than the vendors that come on campus for HVAC and so forth. So I would like to sit down, and then we could talk specifically about which department or service you're resourcing. But typically where we've resourced is culinary and therapy, and the thinking behind that is that's not our specialty. And so we look at it, and For example, Sodexo, and they're being watched closely. That's their expertise, but they have to achieve what the objectives have been laid out. Same with Aegis Therapies. I have a few more minutes left before Steve and Ken have to go to Miller's Grant. Is there another question or two? Yeah.
Pete, just so you know, we do have copies of the presentation up here so they can be handed out on the way out.
Okay.
Okay, and it will also be downloaded on Uniguest.
Which was Touchdown.
Which was Touchdown.
Okay. Any other? Okay, thank you.